backtracking one step, what I've done here with this environment, this is original. This was a copy of a Kronos environment. Um, and what I then did was run an assisted setup. And there is an assisted setup. Now, this is a British environment, so it'll say setup progresses for Great Britain. If you run this in a Australian sandbox, then it'll say setup progresses for Australia. Now it's asked me if you want to run it again. I already run it. I don't really want, but if I don't finish it, it's not a problem. When you get to this, there's some different options. You can either go with it and not create demo setup and projects. And this is what we would usually do if we are creating this in a customer environment. So we would not create demo setup. But if you're doing this in a Kronos, then we would check this create demo setup and projects, because then you get a list of 10 different demo projects, you get some timesheets, etc. If I don't check this, then I will get some questions. I'll actually get some of the same questions either way. What are the posting groups to be used? And it will try to find something based on what is already in setup. But if it cannot find anything in Kronos, it can find this setup based on what the Kronos setup is for this. And it'll fill that in and say, well, use this product posting groups, use this VAT. Of course, that would be GST in your environment, a project posting group. And you might not have the full setup for the project posting group, but at least we need to have one in order to run it. And then some questions on what should be the general model for creating new projects. And here I'm having everything as fixed price. It will ask you to create a number of project managers and a number of time and expense users. And it will create, if project managers, if you say, well, create one, it'll create one called PM001. And if you say two, then it'll create 1, 2, and 3, etc. Same for the time and expense users. I don't think it makes sense to create a bunch of them, but maybe it makes sense to create 1 or 2 of each. You can always delete them later or rename them to something that fits the customer data, but then we at least get some setup in place. And it'll put in a unit cost and a unit price for each of them. In this case, because I'm in a Kronos, it will try to pull some Kronos data to give you some suggestions of rates. Of course, for a real customer, that doesn't make any sense. You will have to use their rates. And that's about it. And then it will create a basic setup based on this. If you, on the other hand, selected create demo setup and projects, you will see that you get some other questions. Instead, it will be, again, the posting groups, and it will be some of the prices, but it'll not ask you how many resources to create, because it will create named resources. It will create a Connie and a Claire and a Cassie and a Daniel and David and so on, because that's part of the demo setup. So it'll not ask as many questions. It'll just use our demo data. And then when you finish it, it'll run through the process. And what you will get with the demo setup is a number of demo projects in the list of projects. Now I renamed these projects here, but we can see I have demo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they are created out of that wizard if you use it in a Kronos. So we get a standard setup where we have something to test with. And that's really the idea. And it's everything here is something that is very similar. It's basically consulting projects, maybe with some development. It's specification, client meeting, development test, implementation, client test, etc. So it's meant to be something that most partners would be familiar with as a process. But of course, it doesn't match the customer's requirements. They will need something else. But again, some standard setup. And we can see it also creates budget. It also actually posts usage. So you can go ahead and use these projects, try to do reporting and change budgets, but trying to pre-populate for you to have something to work with. But it's important to understand the two different ways of using this assisted setup. Either you do it with the demo data or you just do it as the skeleton of the most important setup if you have started setting up a customer environment. I always use what we call the project executive. There is a number of built-in roles here. There is accounting manager, line manager, project executive, and project manager. Honestly, they are 95% the same. I don't know. Somebody decided that there should be different roles for different people, and they kind of made that project executive and then removed a few options and called that project manager, moved a few other options and called that line manager, and same with accounting manager. I always just use the project executive because that's the most inclusive. The others are, again, 95% the same. So it's either that or the time and expense user. The time and expense user is supposed to be for those that only track time and expense. So that is a much more slimmed down role center. You will see here that there's not much in there. This is simply, and now I think I might have adjusted a little bit. So maybe I go for personalize and clear personalization. And then we should see what it looks like. So now here I have a little bit more because I have timesheets, expense sheets, previous timesheets, and previous expense sheets. But that's basically it. So this is for those who only need to track time and expense within this. So this would typically be those with a team member role. And the other topic, more of an introduction thing, is permissions. It's so easy to start setting everything up and everybody's super. And then at the last minute, it's, oh, we need to set up permissions. So let me spend a few minutes on permissions. There's a number of permission sets included in with progressors. And some of them are aggregated permission sets. So if I sort this by extension, we will see that for progressors, we have a long list of these PGS journals, PGS manual sales, PGS price setup, PGS project, PGS resources, etc. And these are more the building blocks. And then there are some permission sets like, again, line manager, which is a combination of some of these. There's no real good documentation on it, or I will say it's just as good as the documentation Microsoft provides on their permission sets. And the official statement from Microsoft is, of course, that permission sets, they're just an example of how you could create a permission set. They are not in any way or form supposed to be complete or even useful in a production setting. I'll not say that is also true for progressives. We try to create something which is useful, but on the other hand, we also know that there are often changes to be made to what is included. The idea would be to, start with something like a project manager or line manager, and then look at what is included and see what makes sense. So let's take accounting manager basic and see what do we have in here. We can see that that includes some permissions, but it also, okay, in this case, it's actually a big, huge permission set. And yeah, this is a bit of a hard one, I think, to do, figuring this out. What do we have in here? Yeah. So I don't know what the best way is and how you create that, but definitely there needs to be some setup created. Also be aware that some of our Prime apps also come with permission sets, and even some of the apps included with progressors, like the advanced feature pack, they also have permission sets that you might need to assign, either for a team member or full user. But that's something we can have a look at when you get closer to that. But you can also see I have prime time, for instance. So that's some for those, resource planning if you use that, etc. Because we do split it up into multiple apps. And again, the documentation is light. Let me put it that way. We also have a concept of project permissions. And the way that works is that every user is connected to a resource in user setup. So if I open up user setup, I can see I have a line here for my user, and I'm connected to the resource of Prakash, meaning whatever Prakash is allowed to see as a resource is what I can see as a user. I also have a checkbox here in resource administrator. And I can uncheck this and we will see what that means. That means if I open up the list of resources, so there are multiple layers in this, I open up Prakash, we can see that now I'm not allowed to make some changes. I cannot change that Prakash is a project executive or project manager. I must be a resource administrator to do that. And so it's an extra layer on top of the BC permissions. If I give myself resource administrator again, then I go into resources, I can say Prakash, I can now make changes. And two of the most important settings on the resource card, besides, of course, unit of measure and posting groups, etc., are these project manager and project executive. If I take away the project executive role, then I'm only allowed to see projects that I'm either the project manager for or where I've been given explicit permissions to work with that project. So let me get out of here again and look at the list of projects. And we can see that now the list of projects is limited to those where I'm the project manager. And if I go in here and I create a new project, and maybe I need to show the customer number here as well. I get a number, I get a, like here, and we can see, okay, I'm the project manager on this one. So good thing. But if I change this to be Cassie, for instance, then it'll actually give me an error because Cassie cannot act as a project manager. So I must say that Cassie can be a project manager. So let's get out of here again and open our list of resources. And I can say Cassie, she can now act as a project manager, meaning I can select her on my project, but that also means I unselect myself as a project manager. Now Cassie is the project manager on project number 10. And if I go to the list here, there is no project number 10 because I'm not the project manager. I gave away my project to Cassie. So this is a really important thing to be aware of, that only those who are project managers can see those projects. They're simply invisible. Now, if I go into my timesheet, I can still track time on project number 10. So looking up in the list, I can see project number 10, it's here. I can track time on it. All is good. Now there are no tasks, so in the end, I cannot really do that. But if there were any tasks, but I'm now logged out from this project number 10. Let me go back and give myself the project executive role. That means that I can go to my list of projects and now I can see project number 10, which is assigned to Cassie. But I could give myself permission because now I'm a project executive. Cassie could give me permissions by going into my project permissions. And in my project permissions, we can see that Cassie is assigned because she is a project PM, so she automatically get permission in here. I could also say, well, Prakash should also have permissions to this. And what permissions should he have? Well, He should be able to work with a task list. He should be able to do budgets. Maybe that's it. But you could even limit that to a subset and say it's only certain tasks that Prakash can make changes to. You could also give permissions to a group of resources and say all project managers will have full permissions on this project. So it can be as simple as that. It could even be and say, yes, it's all resources. We don't even put in who it is, and it's everybody, right? But this permission setup is really important to understand, because otherwise you can get into this situation where you create a project, you set another person as a project manager, and then you don't see the project anymore. And then, of course, on a project, we actually have two project managers. So that's another thing. If we look at the project card here, we will see that we have both a project manager and a person responsible. And the person responsible is basically a project manager too. So in almost all places, it doesn't matter if you're project manager or project responsible. You get the same permissions, you get the same options, you can do approvals, etc. So you can have two people on a project. Maybe it's both Cassie and Prakash who are managing this. How different companies use these for different roles. Maybe somebody is formally the project manager. Maybe the other is more of a project administrator doing the day-to-day. But this concept is really important with the permissions. And especially also for finance. That is one of the things which is really important, because you probably have a finance team who might not be doing project management work, but they will need to do some things that are related to projects. They might need to have a purchase invoice and assign that to a project. So they should probably have a resource for themselves that are project executives so they can see all projects. I think this is where we get the most questions to support, honestly, is on the project, on the resource card. We have, besides all the different settings, there is this section called permissions, where we say, can you see resource cost and can you edit resource costs? And you can say, well, if I don't have these, then if I try to open the list of resource costs, then of course I cannot see anything here. That's obvious. But it goes much further, because the idea here is that if you're not allowed to see resource costs, you're basically not allowed, you should not be allowed to see any amount which could include resource costs. So if I go in here and say, Prakash, he cannot edit and he cannot even view resource cost and prices. And then I open up a project here. Let's take demo one, which we know had a lot of data. We can see there's a lot of usage posted. And then we look here and we see, oh my God, all my usage, my budget, everything is gone. Something went wrong. And this is the most common support ticket we have. I lost all my usage on my project. Everything is gone. We lost the data. And no, we didn't lose the data. We're just hiding the data because we don't allow you to see that. You can still see we can see the number of hours spent, but we don't allow you to see that, because if you could see that there were 50 hours spent and the cost was 5,000 and all the time was on Cassie, then it's not so hard to figure out what the cost of Cassie is. And if that is directly related to her salary in some form, then maybe you can find out what people are making. I'm generally not recommending to limit this too much, because it does become a hassle when people cannot see costs and prices. But for some companies, it is important to hide how valuable people really are. So something to be aware of. I think that does it for the introduction to some of these more management or things that they're nice to know, because otherwise you can easily get stuck on something